This is a topic that I have been casually passionate about for the last couple of years. Alright. I asked you guys a while ago if there were any legitimate concerns you've seen with the MCU Spider-Man or criticisms that you yourself have, and I thought about tackling these points in a video essay, but believe it or not, video essays are really damn exhausting, and doing 39,000 of them in a year, it's tiring. So I'm just gonna bring up points and talk about them, and then I'm gonna interject a couple that I've come across since then, particularly because Troya Boyo said some really stupid things. Now, you'll probably see a lot of the same criticisms that you've seen over the last few years because people aren't very original in their criticisms of this version of the character, but it's just what we're dealing with. So, obviously, elephant in the room, the first major concern is the Iron Boy Jr. argument, like trying to groom him into being Iron Boy, which is something that I myself have been guilty of feeling based on Homecoming, but since I saw Far From Home, my opinion has been changed on that. So since I was of this mindset, I completely understand where it's coming from. It's strange to have a version of Spider-Man whose first actual Spider-Man suit was made by Tony Stark. And beyond that, it's strange that, he took that suit from him to punish him for going after the Vulture where people could have gotten hurt. And then as a reward for going after the Vulture when people could have gotten hurt, he gives him this super high-tech upgraded Iron Spider armor. It feels inconsistent, it feels strange, and it definitely just seems like they're trying to turn Spider-Man into like Spider-Robin to Iron Man's Batman. Alright, so I completely understand feeling that way, but since Far From Home has come out, I see that they were using that to build up a different type of character arc for Peter, where he has spent so much time around Tony and feels that he owes Tony and has to live up to some sort of legacy that he left behind now that he's gone. And that type of stress, that pressure on him is weighing him down emotionally. It's stressing him out. It's tearing him apart. So that's why Happy comes along and is like, hey man, Tony made mistakes. He's not perfect. You're not going to be like him. Don't worry about it. Just be you. That sort of thing. Right. Now, on that topic, I've seen people that say that scene tries to have its cake and eat it too, because right after Happy gives him this huge pep talk about being himself and not trying to be like Tony, he starts blasting AC/DC while he starts working on his new suit. And it's seen as immediately undercutting its own point, which I disagree with. Think about it as the equivalent of the scene, or the equivalent of the What's Up Danger scene in Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse, which is a lot of people's favorite scene, right? Miles talks to Peter, and his dad talks to him, and Peter's like, hey, like, you're just not ready, and I don't know when you're going to be ready, you don't know when you're going to be ready. It's something that you're going to have to feel, but as of right now, you are not ready to be Spider-Man. And then his dad shows up, he's hurt over the death of his brother, and he talks to Miles, and he's telling him, like, hey, I know I've been hard on you, I know I've been trying to push you to be something that you're not, but through it all, you are your own person. I support you no matter what you do, what you become. Whatever happens to you in your life, I'm going to be behind you. Those two conversations enforce Miles' interpretation of the Spider-Man role, the mantle, and all that stuff. That is what inspires him to take his leap of faith, become his own man, become Spider-Man. But after that, he goes and Aunt May gives him some web shooters and an old Peter Parker costume that he spray paints. Is that not thematically the same as Peter getting a pep talk talking about, hey, just be your own hero, and then with Tony's resources, he makes his own suit, and some Tony Stark type music plays. I feel like that's the same thing, right? The character is still becoming his own man. He is forging out on his own path, but he needs a suit. You know what I mean? And the only way that he can get a suit is with somebody else's resources. I just feel like that's something that people don't consider that way. The next thing that people talk a lot about is there's no Uncle Ben, and they feel like that's a detriment to the character. I disagree. I think that you're completely missing the point if you're that hung up on the mere existence of Uncle Ben, that you need his name mentioned all the time. I think John Watts has learned from Spider-Man 3 that Uncle Ben is a very delicate element in the story, because in Spider-Man 3, a lot of you guys know, they changed what happened to Uncle Ben to where he was killed by Sandman and not by Carradine. So there's this variable that even if Peter had stopped Carradine, literally any other sound in the world could have startled Flynn and he would have still shot Uncle Ben. The point of Uncle Ben's death is that it's something that Peter could have prevented, but he didn't. He decided to just not act at all, and it cost him the most important person he had in his life. And so that is why he lives up to the "with great power comes great responsibility," because, like he said in Civil War, if you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you. That is mentioning Uncle Ben. That is a lesson that he learned from Uncle Ben's death. That is why he is Spider-Man. He says in that scene, "I want to stand up for the little guy." Or no, Tony says it, and Peter confirms, he's like, "Yeah, the little guy." And I think that since in Civil War he says he's had the powers for 6 months, Uncle Ben died 6 months ago, it would just be strange for Peter to still be hung up on Uncle Ben. And I know you can say, well, Iron Man died 8 months before Far From Home. Peter's obviously still hung up on Tony. We'll talk about that when we get there. But Uncle Ben died 6 months ago, and he's already resigned himself to trying to do his best retroactively to make Ben proud. This isn't disrespecting the character. This isn't erasing him from the canon. It's just not focusing on something that doesn't need to be focused on. Like, the Batman movie's coming out. Do you really want to see Thomas and Martha Wayne get shot again? Especially because they just got shot last year in Joker for some reason. That happened. Like, it's a part of Peter's origin that you know happened. It doesn't need to come up all the time. And there have been passing mentions of him. His name just doesn't always come up. In real life, if you've lost someone, you will think about them after time passes, regardless of who they were. If they were really important to you, you'll think of them and you'll probably mention them. But is it going to be all the time? You know, these characters do have lives before and after the credits, or before and after the movie takes place. Off-screen conversations about Ben probably still happen. I know that's going to be the thing. We're like, well, if it's off-screen, it doesn't count. They've moved on. You know, they obviously still love Ben. They care about Ben. They probably think about Ben daily. But there's no point in sitting up being depressed about Ben. And I could probably understand that you just want a conversation of maybe, and like, oh, you know, Ben had that same pride that you had, or you look just like Ben did when he was younger, stuff like that. But it's going to feel forced, right? They didn't do it initially, so they shouldn't start doing it now. Injecting Ben into the story would be absolutely pointless. The only Ben I want to see is Ben Reilly. This is just a version of Spider-Man who has dealt with his grief about Ben already, and he doesn't need to sit up and think about him all the time. It's really, really not a big deal at all. Like, in Insomniac Spider-Man game, I think Ben comes up twice, and you can go to his grave. You can go to his grave. It's not forced. And when you do go visit his grave, he's like, "Hey, Uncle Ben, doing my best to make you proud." He's not still hung up on him because time has passed. It's just silly to me. Now, as an extension from that, eight months went by, and Peter is still very clearly thinking about Tony. Not for the same reason that he would have been thinking about Ben, though, because the movie starts with Peter being overwhelmed at the thought of having to take over for Iron Man, having to step up and fill this role, be the figurehead of the Avengers, be this symbol, this icon, this living legend that Tony Stark was. That's a lot of pressure to put on anybody, especially a 16-year-old kid. So yes, he's upset that his mentor died. but he's also freaking out because he feels this massive weight, this crushing responsibility that he does not think he can live up to. And as a response to something Hightop said, it's absolutely organic and absolutely logical that 8 months later, he would just want to take a break from it all, go on a vacation, and get a girlfriend. Time passes. He's not sitting up crying about it every single day. You know, it would be strange if he wasn't trying to move on. Do you not ever try to move on from something that makes you upset? Because that's not healthy. Now, to tackle something directly that Troy Oboyo said, he thinks that this version of Spider-Man is fighting against the little guy and defending the 1%, and will encourage children to latch on to billionaires and worship them. That's horrible. That's actually like a perspective that somebody has on that, because Peter looked up to Tony, yes, but not because he was rich, but because he's Iron Man. And so once they started working together, he was just blown away at the fact that he works for Iron Man. If you're a high school quarterback and then suddenly fucking Peyton Manning calls you and says, "Hey, I want you to start today's game with me," and you're playing the playoffs, and like you kind of put in some work, and you get like a helmet and a jersey and all that stuff from Peyton, you're probably going to want to play again. You're going to be awaiting that text from Peyton Manning like, "Hey, we're going to play again." Don't comment that Peyton Manning's retired. I know he's retired. He retired 4 years ago. I just wanted to use an unproblematic quarterback because I know people don't like Tom Brady because of his allegiances, and I know people don't like Drew Brees for certain reasons. That's not the point. The point is that it's very natural for a child to experience something that elevates his ego and then want it back, you know? And I understand that the villain in The Vulture is very much like anti-rich people, and the fact that Peter is fighting him makes it seem like he's standing up for rich people, when that's not the case. The Vulture has a very skewed perspective on the world. He thinks that Tony is this abhorrent, disgusting, greedy, selfish person who only cares about himself. Peter knows Tony. Peter has worked with Tony and knows that that isn't true. Like, I don't understand. Like, Tony is not an evil billionaire. He's not Jeff Bezos. The man has guilt. He has emotions. He does care about people. That's why he created Damage Control. That's why he was so quick to sign on for the Accords, because he doesn't want other people to be put at risk by what he does, his mistakes. He was trying very hard to leave the world a better place than he found it. That's why he shut down the weapons program in the very first movie. That's why he did the Clean Slate program, because he was too consumed in his work, and the people that he cared about were suffering as a result of it. Like, so even if Peter did worship Tony Stark as a person, that's not a problem, because Tony Stark is a good person, right? And as far as him fanboying over Tony, he fanboyed over all the Avengers. Like, when he met Captain America, he said he was a big fan. If Steve had been the first one to show up at his house and recruit him, it would have been the same thing, and he just would have worshipped Steve and probably never gotten a better suit, and that's fine. You know, you could argue that his arc in Homecoming being that, like, you strip him of this super high-tech suit to see what he's capable of doing on his own. That's not really a Spider-Man arc, it's an Iron Man arc, but it worked. And it worked better than Iron Man 3 did, I'll tell you that for sure. Are there any other valid ones I want to get into before I start talking about the more outlandish stuff I've seen? I want to address something. People have been upset that there's not enough personal consequences for the Spider-Man stuff that he does, but that's not true. Because I got into a debate earlier about whether him blowing off his friends has any lasting impact on the story. And obviously, yes, it does. Because him blowing off his friends in Washington and then Spider-Man showing up is how the Vulture found out his identity. Him blowing off Liz at the prom, which was a very difficult decision for him to make because it's it's like, I probably shouldn't get involved. I am likely going to die if I get involved in this. I don't even have a cool suit anymore. But I'm Spider-Man. This is my responsibility. I have to go stop the Vulture. I finally have a date with this girl I've been trying to get a date with this entire time. But I can't do that right now. I have a responsibility to the people. Those are the types of tough decisions Spider-Man has always had to make, and he makes them in these movies. Maybe people just want to ignore that. Because they were like, oh, well, it doesn't affect his relationship with Ned. Why would it? Ned finds out early in Homecoming that Peter is Spider-Man. Why would he be upset that Peter has to blow them off to go do Spider-Man things when he knows full well that Peter's blowing them off to do Spider-Man things? I don't get thinking behind that. It really doesn't make any sense to me. But like the thing about this version of Spider-Man, or this version of Peter, is that people don't really pay him a lot of attention. Like, does anybody really care that he left Flash's party and never came back? Not really, especially because Flash is picking on him the whole time. You know, Spider-Man was supposed to show up, and he was debating really hard, like, do I show up in there as Spider-Man for clout? Because it will elevate my status in school. People will think I'm cool if I do this. But that's not why I'm Spider-Man. I'm not Spider-Man to get attention. I'm Spider-Man to save people. Like, I think people are missing the point when they're watching these movies. Like, I don't think Homecoming is a perfect Spider-Man movie. I damn sure don't think Far From Home is a perfect Spider-Man movie. I really don't like the first half of it. But all of the Mysterio stuff I love. I think that the type of personal consequences that they're looking for don't fit this version of Spider-Man, and they didn't really exist earlier. Like, Captain Stacy found out that Peter was Spider-Man and told him to stay away from his daughter. That was his dying wish. Peter did not obey that. Like, sure, people, like, when Harry realized that Peter was Spider-Man, he killed Gwen. But that's not exactly a personal consequence of, you know, sacrificing your personal social life to do Spider-Man things. He still got to go to his graduation, as far as I can tell. I didn't watch Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then if you want to talk about social or personal consequences from the Raimi trilogy, he tells MJ that he can't be with her because it's too dangerous. And then in the very next movie, he loses his powers because he's upset that she moved on. But then by the end of that movie, he's with MJ anyway. But then in the third movie, MJ feels like he's blowing her off all the time. Meanwhile, he's doing Spider-Man stuff. And MJ knows full well that he's doing this Spider-Man stuff. Like, sure, that's personal consequences, but it's inconsistent and illogical and does not match the characters up to this point. Like, you have to understand there's a difference between something happening and something being good, you know? Like, him blowing off the Math Olympics, I can't actually remember what it's called, is what helped lead to MJ finding out his identity. And MJ partially finding out his identity is kind of what led to all of the rest of Peter's friends being in danger in the final act, because if MJ hadn't been so inquisitive as to go and investigate, then they probably would not have lost that projector. They probably could have found it after the scene, and Peter's class wouldn't have really been in danger. Is that not an example of personal consequences? And I mean, now the world is kind of hunting him down, because I want to know where the line is drawn between him just being upset that his friends don't like him because he had to blow them off, and things being an actual detriment to his life. I feel like that's an important distinction that needs to be made, and nobody's really interested in making that distinction. I think that's the last, like, really solid thing that I want to talk about. One thing that I saw that somebody mentioned is that he shouldn't be super good looking, and he's not supposed to be very successful with women either. In the Raimi trilogy, he successfully got MJ pretty easily. He could have had her in the very first movie if he wanted her. His landlord's daughter was pretty much in love with him. he was in such a position as to be able to completely just use Gwen, just for just to get back at MJ for leaving him for Harry. Like, Gwen liked him to the point where he could just manipulate her like that. I know it was Black Suit that made him do it, but he could do it. That's the important thing. Betty liked him. Like, he was sweet talking her in Spider-Man 3. You know? Like, Peter isn't supposed to be like male, like just birth control incarnate. Like, he doesn't repel women. I mean, even in the comics, you know, there's been a very, very long list of Spider-Man's love interests. Like, it's strange that people for some reason think that he's not supposed to be able to have luck when it comes to women. And even in the MCU, he got a prom date from the girl he liked, and then now he's dating the other girl he liked. I don't know about you, but getting a prom date and then getting a girlfriend isn't the hardest thing in the world in high school. Like, I don't understand. I don't know. However, I do think it's interesting what he says after this, is that he's supposed to be the funny guy in the Marvel universe, but in a universe of other funny characters, because, you know, most characters are pretty quippy, he doesn't stand out. I don't understand what that's supposed to mean, because, I mean, Iron Man is a quippy character, Deadpool is a quippy character, who am I thinking about? Daredevil has been known to throw out a quip sometimes, even Moon Knight, even Captain America, even the Hulk. Every character is capable of quipping. And MCU Spider-Man is still just as quippy as Spider-Man should ever be in situations where it's appropriate. Like, hey, I'm too busy doing your job for you, or hey, you're not the real Avengers, Hulk gives it away. Stuff like that. Spider-Man isn't funny. He thinks he's a lot funnier than he actually is. And, I mean, sometimes he does throw out a good one-liner, but it's like, he's not a professional comedian. He's just bantering with the criminals because it's something that he enjoys doing. I don't see why other characters joking amongst themselves means that he can't do that. I don't understand. I think that's really strange to me. What's this other one? Oh, okay. So this person says that they should avoid the big CGI battles in the third act because it seems too much like an Avengers movie. Superhero movies pretty much without fail have big CGI third acts, and that's going back to Blade 1 in 1998. 97? 98. 98. Yeah. And I mean, Spider-Man 1 had a pretty big CGI set piece with, you know, the streetcar and the bridge and all that stuff. Spider-Man 2 has a big CGI climax with a giant sun in the middle of a warehouse. Spider-Man 3, the construction site. Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man, the whole lizard thing with the sky beam that's going to turn everybody into lizards. I assume Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Electro. I don't know. Like, this is not something that's new to Spider-Man movies, and it's not something that should be held against the MCU's version of Spider-Man. It's a staple of superhero movies. Is it a good one? Maybe, maybe not. You know? I don't understand, though, why that's being used against against Tom Holland specifically, because it's not something that started when he got here. Beyond that, I feel like most people are just complaining because they want each version of Spider-Man to be the same, or they want it to remind them of Tobey Maguire, even though Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man wasn't that good. I'll talk about that later. Or like, it's just like they aren't willing to accept new elements, new things to keep each version of the character fresh. They just want everything to be so uniform. And I get that there are core values that the character should have. Like, he should be constantly struggling between what he wants to do and what he he has to do. He should bear the weight of responsibility. He should be quipping with criminals. He does all of those things, you know? The only thing that they really miss is the Daily Bugle aspect, and that is something that Toby had that Andrew and Tom have missed out on. That's just a fact of life. That's something that is going to set his version of Spider-Man apart from the other two. But I don't think that makes him worse. You know, I don't think anything that I've mentioned here actually makes him worse. And to be honest, attaching Spider-Man to an Avenger isn't something very new, because, I mean, in Spider-Man's first solo book, in The Amazing Spider-Man #1, he tries to join the Fantastic Four. You know, like, being a part of something is something that he's always wanted to do, at least somewhat. I mean, he's been an Avenger how many times in the comics? Like, there was a comic called The Avenging Spider-Man where he had his own team of Avengers. Like, it had Red Hulk on it. It was cool. It was a cool story. But it's not a sin of Tom Holland. You know, honestly, you should be upset with Sony for taking so long to play ball with Marvel, to the point where they had to introduce him in a big team-up movie. Like, they literally did the best they could with introducing him when they did. He had to be a kid again, otherwise where was he during the Battle of New York? I'll tell you where he was. He was 12 years old. Hadn't even gotten bitten yet. You know? Like, I think that you guys, as in the people that are constantly complaining about this version of Spider-Man, I think you guys are looking at things from the wrong angle, and in some cases searching for things to be upset about. That's not a personal attack on you. I think that that's just genuinely how some people view these movies, because maybe enjoying new things means having to let go of the past, which isn't necessarily the case, but sometimes letting go of the past can be a good thing. But I don't want to get philosophical in my video about Spider-Man. If you agree, or if you think I'm stupid, go ahead and let me know in the comments. We'll hash it out like always. And until then, this has been Toxie Boyo, swinging through Manhattan at 37,000 miles an hour and signing out.